Hey, welcome back to Room 237. This is John, coming at you with another comic book review. And today is actually a non-Batman comic. This is a book that I've been wanting to read for quite a while, especially since I heard all the good things about it, who wrote it, who did the art, and yeah, that is Scott Snyder's Wytches. And this is a fantastic book. I'm a huge horror fan. I've never been much into witches. Like, if I was to watch American Horror Story, which I know it's a crime, I haven't seen it, I would skip Coven. I don't find witches interesting. Interesting or scary. Get that off the screen. Anyway, but this book is awesome. It's by Image, so this is very much for adults. It is incredibly fast-paced. I mean, it's forgivably thin. I mean, I read this within an hour. And I'm not going to go too much into the story because this book is still fairly new. I mean, it came out in, I think, 2015. And so, I mean, this is something I don't want to spoil. This is something I want people to experience. But explaining it the best I can, basically, you know, it starts off, it takes place in Litchfield, New Hampshire. I live in Maine, born and raised, so when you get a creepy woods story in New England, that's very interesting to me. I know that the woods around here are fucking sketchy. But, you know, you get this fantastic artwork by Jock. I know you can't see what's going on, but it's creepy. Yeah, Jock's artwork is very visceral, very raw. You know, like, see, that's some good horror comic stuff. Basically, just like the opening is, there's this woman who's stuck in a tree hollow, and she's saying, "Get me out, get me out." She sees her son. He asks why she's in there, and she says, "'Cause somebody pledged me. Can you grab that rock and try to help break me out of here?" He grabs the rock and he smashes her in the head with it, and then we see these ghastly fingers grab her by the head and pull her back in the tree. As the boy says, pledged is pledged. So it's like this thing people take very seriously. And that was in that part of the story takes place in August 1919, and then we jump up to 2014. There's the Rooks family, Father Charlie, who writes children's books, paralyzed mother, Lucy, and sort of hipster daughter Sailor. And you get the idea that they've like relocated. Sailor is a girl who's ridden with anxiety. She always has panic attacks, is afraid to do a lot of stuff. She thinks the kids at school already know who she is, what she's done. The dad's kind of a goofball, but in like a likable way. You know, he says some really silly things, but he doesn't feel like Nickelodeon silly. You know, it's sort of it's like a heartwarming silly. He tries to be playful with her. And basically, you know, Sailor gets to school and people already know who she is. One girl asks her, like, "Is it true that you killed that girl?" And then we get her backstory. You find out she was bullied by this girl named Annie when they lived wherever they lived before. And real quick, like, I had read the Creepshow comic when I was a kid. I read Hills Have Eyes to Beginning a few years ago, and then that was it. I had read nothing but Batman for like 2 years. And so then I read this, which is an Image comic. And within the first issue, the first chapter, they say fuck a bunch of times. They even drop the C word, which I've never seen in a comic. The altercation between Sailor and Annie. Annie wants Sailor to do something that Annie's going to use to humiliate her at school. And what she wants her to do is really messed up. I'm like, wow. So this book just got fucking real, man. This is intense. And then, just some weird shit starts happening. The dad, Charlie's very worried about Sailor. Sailor thinks she's hearing and seeing these creatures out in the woods because they moved to the same place. They moved to Litchfield, New Hampshire, which where the beginning of the story takes place. And I mean, from there it kind of turns into like a Silent Hill type thing. Daughter goes missing into this world of supernatural horror, and the dad's got to go save her. It's very fast paced, like I said. Some parts you do get a lot of exposition at once. It can get kind of confusing. Like, for me, there was like a couple parts where I had to go back and reread a couple pages. Because Scott Snyder does, there's a few parts where he does throw a lot of information at once. And it can get a little confusing. But yeah, I'm not going to say the ending in this, even if I put spoiler alert in the description. I don't want to spoil it. All I can do is recommend it. And I would. This is, without a doubt, the best horror comic I've ever read. I actually haven't read many comics outside of Batman, but this book is very intense. It gets to a point where it's just like, how is there a way out? There's twists and turns that make you go like, what? I didn't see that coming. It's never boring. Every page makes you want to turn it, see what's next. The last page does end on a cliffhanger, and I know Scott Snyder's doing a volume 2, and I think he said it's coming out around Halloween time. I mean, even some of the reviews, MTV News says the most terrifying comic you've ever read. USA Today says, dark and brutal, witches are like nothing horror fans have ever seen. Paste Magazine, very, very scary, much like the works of Mary Shelley and the other writers of the Via Diodati. Complex Magazine, Snyder has tackled horror before, but Wytches sets out to be an entirely new level of scary. But I think IGN says it best, an awesome and at times terrifying tale. Yeah. I'm trying to think of what I want to say. Yeah, this book got to be scary sometimes. I read this Home Alone, and there were times where I was like, this book's kind of fucked up. But, there's not a lot of characters. It's straightforward till it gets confusing. Obviously, that would make sense. The backstory is, Scott Snyder, when he was a kid, him and his family had this house in Pennsylvania, and him and this neighborhood kid used to walk through the woods and pretend to hunt monsters. They found some old wrecked trucks way out there, and they would play around the trucks, and then one day they thought they saw something out in the woods. Then years later, Scott Snyder got married and had kids. Now they go to the house. He went back out to the woods and he thought he saw something. So this is sort of like a personal story for him. There's a lot of emotional stuff, deals with a retribution, like the dad who he goes from not being a very good dad at all to being a hero at the end. He's the kind of character like in like a Silent Hill type setting where you really root for him as a parent. You know, he does go against all odds. And this is like a nightmarish world that he goes through. But, you know, when I heard about this, Scott Snyder is my favorite comic writer. Jock is one of my favorite artists. And, you know, even on the cover, Stephen King says it's fabulous, a triumph. What more do you want? A good, old school, scary horror comic. I would recommend this to everybody. I mean, even on Google Images, this was the kind of stuff I saw before, and I was like, oh man, that looks fucking awesome. And again, I read it in like an hour because it's really thin. So I bought this for $10. $10, read it in an hour, and I loved it. So I know I didn't go very much in depth with it, but it's because I don't really want to spoil anything. Even if I put spoiler alert, I don't want to ruin this for anybody. This is a comic I want. You know, people who want to read this, I want them to experience it naturally. And the point I made before about how I had just read Batman for like a year and a half or so, 2 years, this was a breath of fresh air. You know, I sort of found myself getting bored and being like, it's the same thing over and over again. Especially since I was catching up on the New 52, and it's all like the same fucking thing. So then when I read this, it was literally a saving grace. It was a breath of fresh air. Now I'm just going to start repeating myself. I loved this book. Loved it, loved it, loved it. I'm kind of worried about a volume 2 because, you know, with sequels, it might tarnish the first one. But with the way the story ended, it is like, well, what's next? I got to find out. So, yeah, Scott Snyder's Wytches. Great book. Great horror comic. It was scary. It was fun. You will not regret reading this. I can guarantee it. If you're a horror fan, you're a Scott Snyder fan, or you just like creepy Image comics, you will not regret reading this. So, from Room 237, I'm John, and that's my sort of informationless review on Wytches. So, thank you.